All right. I do have a drain bucket appropriately placed. All right, that's exactly what we want. What's shaking, YouTube? We have a boatload of stuff going on today here in the One Road garage. I'm working on my 95 GMC Suburban. Not only am I doing a full coolant system flush, a radiator flush, however you want to call it, I'm also replacing the upper and lower radiator hoses that are original to the truck, 1995, and replacing the water pump just because. I've been wanting to do a full system coolant flush on this truck, well, because it's never been done. If we take a look here in the coolant reservoir, we can see that fluid looks pretty dirty. I've also noticed on this current water pump that the gaskets seem to be leaking just a little bit, and this water pump is definitely not that old. So I figured along with doing the full system coolant flush, why not just swap out the water pump and the upper and lower radiator hoses? Just because, preventative maintenance, right? Here you can see the new upper and lower radiator hoses, as well as my new AC Delco original equipment water pump and the new radiator cap. It never hurts to throw a new radiator cap on there, even if you don't think you need one. They're cheap insurance. So if you've been thinking about doing a full system coolant flush, even if you don't drive an older 1995 Suburban like I do, this should be pretty straightforward and fairly similar to most vehicles. This may be just the video you're looking for. Taking a look inside the engine compartment, on the driver's side of the radiator at the bottom, we can see this drain port located right there. To open this port, all I have to do is turn it counterclockwise. And of course, I have a drain bucket to catch all the old fluid so it can be recycled. I'm gonna open this drain port, and you can see that fluid is now leaking out. All right, we're catching most of our fluid in our drain bucket. Now I'm gonna open this radiator cap. And by simply cracking that radiator cap, you can see just how much more fluid can flow. Take a look at the color of this orange DEX-COOL. When it starts to turn brown like that, you know there's a lot of rust in the system. The draining has now slowed to a drip, and I certainly have not removed all of the old fluid. So the next step for me is to remove this lower radiator hose from the bottom of that water pump and see if we can get any more. I got the clamp squeezed in, move the clamp down. Not only are these hoses very tight, but they usually seal themselves to these ports. So I'm gonna use this flathead and try to relieve that seal. See if we can't, yep, I just felt it go. All right, I can hear gurgling down there too. And here it comes. Woo! All right. I do have a drain bucket appropriately placed. All right, that's exactly what we want. Okay, at this point, I definitely do not have all of the old fluid drained out, but that's okay. I'm not trying to make this rocket science here. We're just doing the best we can with this flush. Anything we do to get most of that old fluid out and replaced with new fluid is going to be much better than leaving that old fluid in there. Being that this is a Suburban, I do have a separate heater core all the way in the back of the truck. There is quick disconnect fittings there, and I could remove those and drain the coolant that obviously is still sitting back there, but that's my biggest fear. To remove that seal that hasn't been removed in the entire life of this truck, I think I'd be asking for trouble. So since it ain't broke, I'm not gonna fix it. I'm gonna leave it as is. I'm just going to refill this truck with as much fluid as I removed with this distilled water. And once it's full of distilled water, I'll drive it around with both heaters on full blast, making sure that those heater cores are getting worked. And after I've driven it for a little bit for a chance for this water to get worked through the system, I can drain it out and repeat this process. I may do it 2, even 3 times before I refill it with the new DEX-COOL. All right, because I've drained so much coolant from the system, and now that I've filled the radiator with the distilled water, I'm gonna start the engine to get that water pump working. By letting the engine warm up and that thermostat open and the water pump running, I'll be able to pour some more distilled water down there just to make sure we don't have any air bubbles. Okay, so one very, very serious note here. Absolutely never ever pour new fluid into a hot engine. Anytime you're pouring new fluid or cold room temperature fluid into an engine, the engine must be completely room temperature also. If you do pour cold fluid into a hot engine, you have the very high possibility of cracking your engine block, and you don't want that. So absolutely make sure once you drain out your old fluid that the engine has had a very good, proper amount of time to cool down completely. Completely cool down before you add any new fluid to the system. Okay, so the motor's been running for a while now. I have it up to temperature. I have both heaters cranked, and there is very hot air coming out of those vents. You can kind of see the water level at the bottom of this reservoir here. The first time I filled it up to the hot point and it sucked it all out. I filled it up again to that hot point and now it sucked it down to there. I have been giving it some gas, letting it rev at about 2,000 RPM at times, just trying to get the water to fully circulate throughout the truck. So rather than taking it out on a drive now, I'm gonna shut it down, let it cool down, and drain this first flush out. Okay, motor's off. Like I said before, I'm not looking for perfection with this radiator coolant fluid flush. I just want it to be better than before, and I want it to be easy. So that's why I'm not taking extra steps to make sure that every last bit of the old fluid is drained out of this system. I'm just draining it where I can, as much as I can. Okay, so this is drain number 2. We're gonna attempt to get as much of this coolant out as possible. I did also remove that lower radiator hose off of the water pump. At this point, I just wanna be 100% sure that I let this engine cool down all the way. It's gonna take some time, but it's better than risking a cracked engine block. While I wait for the engine to cool down all the way, I'm gonna take this opportunity to replace this upper radiator hose with my new one. On the engine side, this upper radiator hose connects down to this thermostat housing, which then comes all the way over to the radiator. This is the original hose clamp and hose, so it may take some time. Okay, so I'm just gonna try to pre-fit this new hose. I did notice it's a slightly different shape than the old hose, but it does seem like it's going to work just fine. With the original hose, I had to make this little bracket here to hold the hose up off of these fans. Of course, the original hose was held up by the original factory fan shroud, but now that I have electric fans, I had to fabricate this little piece to hold the hose up. With this new hose, it seems it sits a lot lower, and it also seems that it kind of sits on the alternator a little bit. Overall, I think it's a pretty good fit, and I think it's gonna work. Upper radiator hose is now done. I have it connected and secured to the thermostat housing, as well as to the upper radiator outlet. While the engine is cooling down, I use this time to fashion a new bracket to ever so slightly hold up this radiator hose so that it is no longer touching the alternator. I also put a piece of vinyl tubing around the bracket so that it wouldn't dig into the hose. So it's been a few hours now and I've let the motor cool down quite a bit. I'm now comfortable refilling the radiator with the distilled water, which I've already done. I also poured an entire gallon of distilled water in this overflow reservoir. So when this thing heats up, it'll suck this water into the system as needed. The motor is running and I can add a little more water because that water pump sucks it down. So now I'm gonna wait for the engine to heat up till that thermostat opens just to make sure we have enough liquids in the system. We are now in a new day. The mosquitoes started coming out yesterday, so I called it quits. As of right now, we have drained and filled again and drove around this 95 Suburban. I drove around quite a bit with both heaters on just to make sure there was no air bubbles in the system. With the natural movement of the truck while driving, I was hoping that those air bubbles might work themselves out, which I don't think I had a problem with that at all. I also wanted to make sure that all this new water was mixing with the old coolant throughout the system. So now when I drain it for this third time, I should get a pretty good drain with hopefully a lot clearer looking fluid. There we go. Next I'm going to remove this cap. And right away I can hear this fluid start pouring out a lot faster. After removing the serpentine belt, I was able to remove the 4 bolts holding the water pump in and easily remove the water pump. All I have to do now is clean up this mating surface and install the new water pump. Okay, old water pump here, new water pump here, and I do have the pulley transferred over from there to there. So we should be good to go. Everything is ready to rock. I have my new fitting here for the heater hose. Before we install the water pump and refill the system, let's have a look at what we drained out. This right here was our first drain, our second drain, and our last drain. While these first 2 drains look very similar, I can tell a difference that this one is just ever so slightly lighter. There is a really big difference with this third drain than the other 2, and that is because this one is mostly water. And this is very good. This is just what I'm after. I said in the beginning that I'm not after a perfect flush. I wasn't waiting to see the water run completely clear before I refilled with new DEX-COOL. For me, this is clear enough that I can refill with some concentrated DEX-COOL and some distilled water, and it'll be much better than what was in there. The new water pump is installed and the bolts are torqued to 30 foot-pounds. And now I'm gonna fit the new lower radiator hose. Okay, you can see I have this lower radiator hose connected now. Both hose clamps are on and tight. And surprisingly, I have to say, this new hose fits a lot better than the original did. You probably noticed that I had a bunch of zip ties holding the old lower radiator hose to this line here, and that was to keep it out of the way of this fan. For some reason, this new hose is a lot longer, and so it sits actually completely below the shroud of the fan. So I'm not gonna have to re-zip tie anything, and I don't have to worry about it getting into the fan blade. Because I flushed this system 3 times, I know there's a high concentration of distilled water in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and use 1 full gallon of concentrated DEX-COOL and follow that with 50-50 mix until full. Nice and orange. Okay, so the truck is running and so far there are no leaks. I'm waiting for it to get up to temperature so the thermostat will open, then I'll know if I need to add more fluid. I filled the radiator as much as I could. I also installed my new radiator cap, and you can see I filled the reservoir to the cold line. The engine's now been running for quite a while and it's fully up to temperature. This means that coolant has been circulating throughout the entire system, including that rear heater core. I've had both heaters on full blast inside and they are very hot. So far as I can tell, there are no leaks to speak of. That includes the gasket mating surface from the water pump to the engine, also that upper radiator hose and the lower radiator hose. Leak-free. Also, I wanted to show you inside my Chilton book here, Chapter 1, page 41, we have the section for the cooling system. This says that the coolant filled from the factory is good for just 2 calendar years or 24,000 miles, whichever occurs first. Down here in the draining and flushing section, it says the cooling system in your truck accumulates some internal rust and corrosion in its normal operation. A simple method of keeping the system clean is known as flushing the system. It says this operation should be performed every 30,000 miles or once a year. It does recommend using a can of Radiator flush. In terms of those Radiator flush products sold at your local auto parts store, I didn't want to use one of those. Reason being is I know I'm not going to be able to get it all out. I don't want to have that Radiator flush product in my cooling system while I refill and drive it around for a few years. I don't know if that stuff would be good to sit in the system while I'm running the truck for a few years. So I opted not to use that and just to do 3 flushes using distilled water. They have an entire section here telling you how to flush the system, which is pretty much exactly what I did. It says to repeat the process until the drained water is mostly clear. I know it doesn't seem it, but this is good enough for me. Hopefully this will give you a better idea of what we got out of the system and what we have in there now. All right guys, been driving this thing around for a bit now, through the neighborhood, up and down hills, stop and go at stop signs and whatnot. Everything seems to be good. No leaks, no overheating. The temperature seems to be okay. All in all, I used 2 gallons of coolant, 1 gallon of concentrated, and 1 gallon of 50-50 mix. That seems to be just about what I would get out of the system every time I drained, about 2 gallons. After 3 drains, that coolant was light orange, which is why I chose to use a full gallon of the concentrate. I then topped it off with the 50-50 mix. Did I say there was no leak? Because there's a small leak. Well, boys and girls, here's the top of our water pump, and although you can't see any fluid down here now, it's all dried up and everything, but there was a leak down here. I'm not sure if it was coming from this, which is what I suspect. It possibly could have been coming from these threads. I didn't put any extra thread sealant on there. It already comes from the factory with this white thread sealant on there, so I just screwed it in nice and tight. It's what I've been doing and haven't had an issue, although I did have a little bit of a leak there. It also could have had something to do with this quick connect side. I really don't like these. They are sealed by a simple little O-ring, and this aluminum tube can move around in there. Not to mention when I actually cinch this thing down, you can see just how much this thing moves in here, and I just don't like that connection. Interestingly enough, you can see this heater hose here goes right to another quick connect fitting in the top back of the motor there. Love them or hate them, those quick connect fittings are great in some ways and not so great in others. So rather than deal with a potential leak that I have going on now or a future leak that I could have, I am going to just get rid of this one, at least this one on the water pump. The other one there on the back of the motor seems to be good. I haven't had any issues with it, no leaking, nothing like that, and I have checked on it. So for right now, I'm gonna go ahead and switch out this one on the water pump. Real quick, I wanted to show you the difference between the original quick connect fitting inside and this new brass fitting that I have. You can see the brass fitting is nice and open, and look how small the hole is inside this quick connect fitting. So that brass fitting is actually going to flow a heck of a lot more fluid than the original quick connect fitting would. Don't know if that's better or not, just different, and thought I'd show you. Again, I'm going to thread this in by hand. This is just to ensure I'm not going to cross thread anything. And this is the final connection of the new 5/8 inch hose setup. That'll work just fine. And there we have it. There's our new brass fitting with our new 5/8 heater hose that stretches all the way around and seals up very nicely to the existing heater core side. Well, I'm happy to report she's running and there are no leaks. So there's our new fitting. I can also feel that there is very hot coolant running through this hose and we have 0 leaks. Also looking down here, absolutely 0 leaks. So everything is looking perfect. Now, obviously only time will tell if one of these connections will end up leaking, but as of right now, 0 leaks, and I don't anticipate it leaking. The quality of the connection seemed very high on both ends. I'm using a very good hose clamp, so I don't anticipate it leaking. Hopefully it won't. Other than that, guys, that will do it for this repair. We did a new upper and lower radiator hose. We flushed the entire coolant system. We added an original factory AC Delco water pump and just swapped out the original GM heater hose quick connect hose fitting system and replaced it with what I think is going to work much better for years to come. If this video helped you, if you enjoyed it at all, please hit that thumbs up. This stuff is hard work. I'm working at about 110-degree temperatures today, so it definitely takes a lot of hard work and dedication to get these videos made, to film all these things that I'm doing on my vehicles, and to hopefully give you guys some form of entertainment. So hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already. If you're subscribed and you do want to be notified when I upload videos, you gotta hit that bell icon. That's the only way it's gonna happen. YouTube will send you an email and it'll have my thumbnail and everything and tell you that I just uploaded a video. Other than that, check the description below for more information, links to all the stuff I used. I'm Jimmy for One Road, and I will see you in the next one.